Absolute positioning lets us move an element based on its parent element, but the trick here is that the parent element has to be position relative. So taking over from that last lesson, what I have here is just a regular box. And if I go back to my editor here, let's go ahead and change this position to not absolute, but relative. And that's this box in here. And let's make some space to work. And this really does nothing from that last lesson. Now, where this gets powerful, where absolute positioning comes in, is let's say I have a second box. So let's do second dash box. And this is an Emmet abbreviation. So if you're just joining this course now, you haven't taken CSS 101 or HTML 101 or HTML 201, where I talk about Emmet abbreviations. All I'm doing here is writing a little bit of CSS. And as soon as you see this Emmet abbreviation, you can hit tab and it creates a div for you by default with a class of second box, just like writing CSS, and then you just hit tab. And let's say this needs to be in the top right. So let's go back to our page here and refresh, and this just says top right. Now we can add some styling to this, and let's say it needs to be a box in the top right quadrant. What we can do is now select this box, and we can say second box, position, absolute. Let's also give this a border of 3 pixels, solid, blue, just so we know where we're working. And when we do position absolute, literally nothing changes. It just added a border around here. I'm going to zoom in even more here. Now, what I would like to do is for this to move into this top right quadrant, as if I was making a graph with an X and Y axes, and it has a negative X and a negative Y axis. What I can do is, because this is position absolute, I can now say, let's stick this to the top. And that's going to say 0. It's already there by default. But in case your element isn't, what this is going to do is move this to the top of the page. And as an example, let's do bottom. So bottom 0 is going to say that position absolute around this relative element is going to stick to the bottom. And then we could say right 0. And now that moves it to the bottom right. Now to move this back up, all we have to do is change that bottom to top. So we set position absolute, top is 0, right is 0. And all this is going to do is move this to the top right. Now that is what we wanted, but we want it to take up like this full quadrant here. So what we can do is we can say a width of 50%, and let's try a height of 50%. And now we have a box in that top right quadrant. And that's what position absolute allows us to do. It allows us to do something like this. Now, this is sort of an ugly example, but if we wanted to, we could give this a background of black. And let's go ahead and get rid of this border. And now it looks like we've carved out a chunk of this. Now, if we want to get even fancier, we're often not going to be working with borders all the time. So let's go ahead and get rid of this black border on our parent element, the box, the relative element. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. And now we've moved this box somewhere where it doesn't live naturally. So there's this 300 by 300 box. You can see it here. And we've said out of that 300 by 300 box, take 50% of the width, 50% of the height for 150 by 150, move it to the top right. Now I'm just going to quickly undo that, and I'm going to show you what happens when I take position relative away from the parent element. So I'm working on the box here. And if I get rid of position relative, it goes straight to the entire page. It takes up 50% of the page's width, and it takes up 50% of the page's height, or the viewport actually, not the entire page, but just the viewport here. Which could very well be the same thing depending on your page. So yeah, if you ever want an element to sort of be absolutely positioned, you have to make sure your parent element is using position relative. Now, it's not doing any harm. You'll notice that when I toggle this on and off, that box on the left here doesn't change whatsoever. It just changes the behavior of its child elements. And this is a really important concept to understand in CSS, because when we get to the end of this course, we're going to be working with a lot of child elements.